No amount of me wanting that guy to have a life is the same as that guy wanting to have a life. And so I remember there was a guy named Lulu, and Lulu was a gang member who I knew for a long time, and actually his birthday is today, and that's odd that I didn't think of this, but he was a gang member, but he was also a drug dealer. He's selling crack in Aliso Village housing projects. And then before too long, he became his own best customer. And so he was completely sprung on crack. And so I'd say, hey, do you want some help? It's probably time to go to rehab. Oh, no, I'm okay, thank you, though. And pretty soon it got so bad that he finally came to me and said, I need some help. So I drove him to this mountaintop drug rehab, and there he was for a month when his younger brother Eric did something that gang members don't do. He took a gun and put it to his temple and killed himself. And it's more likely for a gang member to walk into harm's way, to go into an enemy's territory and hope to die. They never did that. So I called Lulu, Luis is his name, but we all call him Lulu, and I called him and I told him what happened. He was obviously devastated. I said, I'm going to pick you up for the funeral, but I'm going to drive you straight back. And he says, I want to come back because I like how recovery feels. So I picked him up, and he greeted me, and he threw his arms around me, and we got in the car, and he said, I had a dream last night, and you were in it. And he said in the dream, we'll say we're in a room this size, but there are no lights, there are no windows, there's no illuminated exit signs. There's no light creeping under any door. It's a pitch black room, and he knows that he and I are the only ones in the room, even though we're not speaking. And at some point in the middle of the silence and the darkness, I reach into my pocket and I pull out a flashlight, and I hold it steadily on the light switch on the wall, and I don't move, and the beam of light just stays steadily on that light switch. And Lulu, who's telling me the dream, says he knows that he's the only one who can turn the light switch on. He's grateful that I happen to have a flashlight. And so he inches his way with great trepidation towards the light switch, and he stands in front of it and takes a deep breath, and he flips the light switch on, and the room is flooded with light, and now he's sobbing in the telling of the story. And he says to me with a remarkable voice of discovery, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know this to be the case. And he said, I guess my brother never found the light switch. Well, that story changed my life. I was about to burn out. I thought my task was to reach out to people. I thought my task was to save people. I thought my task was to reach them. And then I decided, no. I own a flashlight. I know where to aim it. I don't save anybody. I will allow myself to be reached by people. I think it's the worst trap imaginable to think that your job is to save people. If you allow yourself to be reached by people, watch what happens. It's an ennobling act. If you would allow yourself to receive people, people are flooded with a sense of their own dignity and worth. It's important to have places where people feel they can go. And in the end, what it's about is paying attention. And then if you're attentive to people, it makes a difference. But my model really is recovery, because in recovery they say it takes what it takes. And that's why Homeboy is not for those who need help, it's only for those who want it. So you have to walk through the door. If I think. Yes, sir. No, that's okay. Well, I'll repeat it. It's really way easier. Trust me, I do this all the time. Yes.
Two questions.
Yeah.
When you talked about the funerals, you gave a specific number. So obviously you've gone through this 203 times tomorrow, or this funeral.
Next week.
What is it? Is it when you're doing the funeral, you see the process repeating itself again? That must be tiresome on you. And what do you say to the community? Second question is there any retaliation from other gang members for your ministry? Because you're literally taking people out of the gangs and helping them? Have you had any retaliation from rival gangs for what you do?
Yeah, I'll answer the second one first about retaliation. There's a sense that gang members will somehow not like me or Homeboy Industries because of what we do. And in the old days, you know, first 10 years were death threats, bomb threats, hate mail, but never from gang members because we represented hope to gang members, always. We were an exit ramp off this crazy, violent freeway. But people, when the demonizing was the fullest, which was in our first 10 years, a lot of hostility, from cops, from people who had so demonized this population, that the friend of our enemy is our enemy. So it was a short hop to demonize me if you were demonizing the gang member. But never from gang members, that's a myth. All gang members want what the homies have. They may not be able to walk there. It's a little bit like, you would never think that an active heroin addict would somehow hate drug rehabs. Doesn't make any sense. Or hate somebody who's in recovery. That doesn't make any sense. They may say, I'm not ready, good for you, but they wouldn't be hostile towards a drug rehab. It's the same thing. But people presume that that's what it's, that's a factor. And the first question was about funerals. Help me out with that one again. I've done 200, I'll do 203.
And it's all kind of like rival person, anger, they're shot, they pass away due to violence amongst inner gangs. Yeah. You have to minister to the same families again. It's like a perpetual circle. How do you personally deal with that when?
Yeah, so the question is about dealing with the, the perpetuation of this violence, the same people, what do you say to them? And it's often not the same people. You know, in the early bad days, the decade of death was 88 to 98. At one point, I buried 8 kids in a 3-week period. That was during the time of, it was just shootings morning, noon, and night, and so everybody's traumatized by that in that period. It's a little different now, you know. I've buried lots of kids in the last couple of years killed by police. I still count them because it's part of the gang, violence part. It's about somebody having a gun or not having a gun or running from the police, and that's a whole other issue. But yeah, I mean, in the early days, it was really a lot of how do you get folks gang members to honor the dead person, by loving their enemy. That was a tough one. I had homies walk out of homilies often. But that's what you're supposed to do. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, just holler it out.
Thank you so much for sharing your ministry and kinship.
Sure.
My question is, you obviously deal with children that are teenagers and so on. I was wondering if Homeboy Industries has anything in place for the younger child or preventative measures in your community to help and to kind of share that with us as teachers.
The question is about prevention. We're decidedly an intervention program. In the same way that a drug rehab is decidedly to help those who have a drug problem. Though they may be sympathetic to the notion of how do you keep kids from using drugs, they have a role. We're going to help the drug addict who's addicted. It's the same thing. So people will always ask me, sometimes not as nicely as you have, well, what are you doing about prevention? And I always say nothing. What are you doing about prevention? Because the idea is the whole community's response is prevention, intervention, enforcement, aftercare, reentry. It's a whole community response. This is not a crime problem after all. It's a community health problem. So under 14, kids who haven't joined gangs, how do you keep them from doing that? And there's only 3 profiles of a kid who joins a gang anyway. There aren't 4, there aren't 8, there are only 3. The kid who's so despondent he cannot imagine a future for himself, so his present isn't compelling. And if your present doesn't compel you, then you will not care whether you inflict harm, and you won't care whether you duck to get out of harm's way. A lethal absence of hope. That's the first profile. Second profile is the traumatized and damaged kid. Everybody knows that a damaged kid is going to cause damage unless you intervene. It's a kid who cannot see his way clear to transform his pain, so he keeps transmitting it. And the third profile of the kid who joins a gang is a mentally ill kid. But it's usually a combo worker of, and on a continuum of severity, more despondent than mentally ill, more mentally ill than traumatized. But that's it. There isn't a fourth profile. There isn't a fifth profile. I was in a city recently in the States where the police handed me a little brochure that's supposed to go to parents to how do you tell if your kid is, gravitating perilously close to a gang, and it said the reason kids join gangs is for excitement. And I went, wow. And that's an example of the outsider view driving the inside of what we do, of our policy. But nothing could be more wrong-headed to think that a kid joins a gang for excitement. Wine, women, and song, join a gang and see the world. Preposterous. Those are the three profiles, period. And if we knew that to be the right diagnosis, what would we do? Well, we'd infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign. We would heal the traumatized. And we would deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. If you did that, wow. But a bad diagnosis has never led to a good treatment plan. That's never happened in the history of the world. I had leukemia some years ago, and I'm feeling okay at the moment. I'll see my doctor in 2 weeks. Or as the homies say, I hear your cancer's in intermission. Yes. Apparently it stepped out to the lobby to buy drugs. May the line be long. But I went to give blood, and and the guy taking my blood said, oh my God, go to a doctor fast. So I went to a doctor, and he said, oh, you have mono. And so for a year, I didn't even deal with this. And I think you can agree that there's a difference between mononucleosis and leukemia. But the point is, a bad diagnosis is never neutral. It puts you behind the 8 ball. You have to play catch up. I had to be rushed into chemotherapy because it had gone so misdiagnosed. So that's, with all the social ills, what's it about? People think sometimes, it's like the Middle East or it's Northern Ireland. Let's bring the sides together and have them work it out. No, that's wrong-headed. There is no conflict in gang violence. There's only violence. It's not about anything. What language is the violence speaking? In the same way with your kids, you go, what language is this behavior speaking? You want to get at it. Is it about despair? Is it about trauma? Is it about abuse? Is it about mental illness? All that stuff matters, because everything's about something else. Yes, sir?
I know in some of your earlier stories and readings, the role of the mother within this community, you didn't really hit on that today with a sense of hope and how you work with the mothers within this community. Could you talk a little bit about that?
The question is about working with mothers, but by the time the kid gets to us, there's kind of no there. People will say, are you working with the families? I go, where are they? It's hard to wrap your mind around the sheer size of what these folks have had to carry, what they've had to endure, unspeakable acts perpetrated more often than not by the people whose charge it is to love them. So our place, Homeboy, is a little bit like the Discovery Channel, In the old days, we used to say, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Here's a job, go. But what we didn't acknowledge, we've learned after 28 years, that healing is everything. A job is nice, but healing is forever. Unless there's some healing, they're going to return to criminality. They're going to re-offend. They're going to go back to prison. Because with healing, you have attachment repair, you have resilience, you have re-identification. The gang member says, oh, yeah, okay, I used to think courage meant packing a gun. Now I know that has nothing to do with courage. That's important stuff that all happens there. So, and then homies do the work. We always say, you know why he took you to that place? You're not doing the work. the homies say this to the younger homies if they fight or whatever. And the trick is to do the work, to come to terms with what's happened to you and what you've done. So I had an African-American gang member named Jermaine, 30 years old, come into my office, and they do this all the time, you know. And he says, I have to tell you about something I discovered today. So he tells me that at 9 years old, it's like he retrieved this memory perhaps for the first time. At 9 years old, he was in his bedroom. And the door opens, and he can see, bleary-eyed as he's trying to come to awaken, he sees his mom standing in the doorway, backlit by the light from the hallway. And she's standing there with her arms outstretched, and she's not speaking. And he looks at her, and he notices that she has deeply and profoundly slit her wrists, and blood is coursing onto the floor. And then she says to her 9-year-old son, "See what you made me do." The very next day, he was taken from her care and put in foster care. His 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, weren't taken, which only underscores all the things you wouldn't want to underscore. Foster home, 13 got into a gang. At 17, he was raised from that moment forward by the system, by being incarcerated. 30 years old, doing the work at Homeboy, here's his discovery that day. He's sobbing, sitting in my office, and he says, I discovered today that I had preferred my rage to my shame. And because he made that discovery, for the first time in his life, he was able to forgive his mother for having been mentally ill and forgive himself for having once been a 9-year-old boy. That's the work of Homeboy. Because then after his 18 months with us, he's going to leave us. And the world will throw at him what it will, but this time, he won't be toppled. And that's the difference. But that's the issue, you know, that they come to you with a storehouse of unspeakable things that have been done to them, which only have everything to do with the fact that they got into a gang and were violent. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like you to speak to, I think, the innocence of people that, you know, quote unquote, haven't experienced normal life. And the invitational nature of developing relationships with people who are not familiar with healthy relationships. So I've listened to a lot of your speeches and things, and you've talked about people coming to you when they're tired of being tired. And that's always stayed with me, that you kind of have to get to that point where you don't see any other possibility and they end up at your door.
Yeah, did everybody hear that? Yeah, good. It works. So, yeah, you know, part of the thing is, you know, I'm tired of being tired. You know, you have to wait for people. Ours is a God who waits. Who are we not to wait? But we think we have to rescue and save the day. And the truth is, especially in things like this, is you have to wait till people are receptive to do this. You know, in the old days, I used to suggest therapy, and they say, forget it, I'm not crazy. And nowadays, they're amenable to it, and there isn't a stigma, and they tell you why, because of that stupid movie with Billy Crystal and Robert De Niro, Analyze This, you know. And they would reference that. I went, whatever, you know. But because there isn't a stigma to it, but you have to wait for people to, they'll say in recovery you have to hit bottom. You don't have to hit bottom. But sometimes, you know, I can remember a kid named Bandit who, you know, who was a bandit. You know, I mean, he was selling drugs and always impervious to my offers of help in the days when I rode my bike in the projects. And until one day he walked in and I couldn't believe it. And he was one of the many who said, I'm tired of being tired. So I sent him to a job, one of our 4 job developers in our employment services division. And they hired him, found him a job at a warehouse, and then he became, you know, the supervisor, and then he's the main guy at the warehouse. You know, he's running the whole thing. Married, 3 children. owns his own home, you know, and I hadn't heard from him in a long time, and so he calls me some Friday late afternoon, and he's kind of in a panic, and he says, "Gee, you got to bless my daughter." And I said, "Why? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" He goes, "Oh, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College." Imagine my oldest, my Lisa, she's going to college, but she's a little chaparrita. She's so tiny, and she's going to move away from home, and Humboldt College is in Northern California. It's far away. Could you give her a blessing before she goes? I go, "Are you kidding? I'd be honored to do that." Look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have an exorcism at 1. Why don't you come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off? And so sure enough, they show up, Bandit and his wife, the 3 kids, including tiny little Lisa. And so we stand in front of the altar, and you know, I said, "Let's encircle her." So put her in the middle. We all get around her, and everybody touch her. You know, put your hands on her shoulder and her head. Go ahead, grab her arm, close your eyes, and bow your heads. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. You know, I go on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice we've all become chillones, which means you're crying. We're all chillones. We're all crying. I don't know why we're crying. Mainly because I think Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college. Certainly nobody in their families. I think I may be the only person. And so I finished the prayer, and we're all crying, and I'm wiping away my tears. I'm trying to change the subject a little bit. And "Hey, Lisa, what are you going to study at Humboldt College?" She was very quick. "Forensic psychology." I go, "Damn, forensic psychology." And Bandit says, "Yeah, she's going to study the criminal mind." And Lisa looks at her father and does one of these. Sees her and laughs and says, "Yeah, I'm going to be her first subject." So we go outside and big abrazos, and they get in the car, and Bandit hangs back, and I said, "Hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you." And his eyes glisten with tears, and he says, "You know, I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife. O bueno para nada, good for nothing. I guess I showed them." I said, "Yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. Sure, you'd want to accelerate that as much as you could. But ours is a God who waits. Who are we not to wait?"